I think, as I said, the best thing that we can do about central banking and the topic is to make people aware of it. And that's why Rudy and I are asking you to share this video as much as possible. Make sure you hit the like button. Yeah, and make sure you comment as well. And make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Yeah, and talk to your friends about it, about the topic. And they say, how did you know that? Well, tell them about my channel. Saturday, January 6, 2024, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So, today we're going to talk about central banking and how central banks are the biggest parasitical institutions on the planet and how they need to be abolished. Yes, Rudy's listening intently. I think he knows quite a bit already about central banking, just like Billy used to know. But yeah, before I start though, I like to make an analogy of what I think central banks are. They are, in my opinion, especially in these times of wealth inequality, heavy taxation, cost of living crisis, they are the biggest shoplifters on the planet. Yes, I'm here in the UK and I'm hearing a lot of stories about shoplifting, and it's being done on a professional scale. And why is that? Well, because the biggest shoplifters, the biggest shoplifter of them all, the Bank of England and the banking cabal around it, private banks and the government, are stealing so much from us through the mechanism of fiat currency and central banking. Yes, I'm hearing that people are doing shoplifting on an industrial scale, stealing steaks, butter, cheese, and selling them on a lot cheaper to the general public. It's kind of a modern day Robin Hood. Not quite, because they're not giving it to them, they're selling it. But, and why they're doing that? Well, because the Bank of England, the Fed, the ECB, it doesn't matter where you are, they're doing the same thing, the central banks. They're issuing this currency out of thin air, and of course they have the monopoly over it. They're given the legal power through Parliament or through Congress or whatever kind of legislative body you might have in your country to do that. While we have to accept that currency, yeah, by force. I think it was Lenin who said that, or Stalin, that the only reason the state or government has any power because it has, it can use a gun against you. It's all by force. If you don't do it, we can kill you or put you in prison. And central banks are, yeah, some people might argue, oh, maybe if we abolish the private or hybrid central banks, we can open a national bank and that would be good. Well, that's not really the solution either. Yeah. What if I told you that central banking or centralized credit was one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto? Well, it's true. Check it out. Google it. The 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And we know that communists, they hate freedom. They hate private property. And I would venture to say that the people that own the central banks, the families and the institutions behind central banking, they're communists because communists hate competition. They don't want a free market in money and banking. I mean, and that's if you need banks really, because back in the days, you could carry your gold or silver or copper coins around and you didn't need to bank. I think banking is also a way of keeping track of what you do. So I'm not really a big fan of banks, period, and especially not central banks. So I'm going to go briefly over the history of central banking in the West. because that's really where it started. And then we're going to look at what the impact of central banking has been, and how we're still feeling that impact, and how it facilitates wars and big government and all the other bad things that we have in our society today. So we have to go back to the 17th century, and it wasn't the Bank of England that was the first central bank, but it was the Riksbank from the Kingdom of Sweden, and it's still around. It was created in 1678, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look at Sweden in the 17th century, it was waging loads of wars. So that's what central banks are all about. They are instruments of the state, and they allow the state to wage war, and then they, through the monopoly of the issuance of the currency, through debt, they allow the monarch or the president or the state to pass on, the bill for wars and all other projects that they feel like having onto the public through the national debt. So the other side of the fiat currency in central banking is the national debt. Is it any wonder that after 111 years, or 110 years really, just about, since the Fed was created in 1913, that the national debt is ballooned to 34 trillion. Is it any wonder that we've had the worst wars in the history, in modern history, World War I and World War II, and we keep having all these minor wars and constant wars, constant interventions in the last 100 years? No, it's no coincidence. And of course, when you control the issuance of the currency, you control half of all transactions in the economy. Not just transactions though, but you can control institutions like the media, education, universities, think tanks, and you manipulate and you brainwash people into thinking that you need the central bank, and that's and that's why when you talk about this topic, very few people understand what central banks are all about. So yeah, we started with the Riksbank 1678, and then came the Bank of England in 1694, and England, of course, had been through a lot of turmoil in the 17th century, fighting wars as always, revolutions, and then this creation of the Bank of England kind of helped solve that problem, because, as I said, prior to central banks, if monarchs wanted to wage war or go on adventures, the bill, was their bill. But with a central bank, they could pass everything on to the public in the manner of a national debt. And of course, we're approaching 3 trillion pounds in debt, not as much as the US, but that national debt has been accumulating since 1694. And it's interesting because these people in charge of the system, the people who run it, they don't try to hide things. The founder, one of the founders of the Bank of England, William Patterson, he said the following: "The bank hath the benefit of interest on money it creates out of thin air." So it gives an unfair advantage to the financiers, to the bankers, and to the companies, corporations, and the governments around it. And the people who lose out are the general public through inflation, because inflation is basically theft. Central banks, they don't issue real money, i.e. gold and silver or copper or anything you might want to use as money. They issue promissory notes, and they force you, of course, through legal tender laws to accept that. And that's where we come to the shoplifting, right? So can you imagine if in your neighborhood you could do that? People would, in the beginning, they would accept it, but eventually they would see that it was a scam. And that's what central banking is on a national and even worldwide scale these days. They are, yeah, parasites. And the other thing that they try to, how can I say, stop the discussion, the way they try to stop the discussion is that talking about these topics is, you know, against a certain ethnic group or religion. But I try to look at it through the mechanism. It doesn't matter if someone is white, red, black, yellow, or whatever religion. If they're involved in central banking, it's wrong. And so the other thing as well about central banking is that it's the engine for wars, right? And many other crises like pandemics. So what that does when you ingrain that system into a nation is that the powers that be, the elites, they're always looking for crises because that's the only way to keep the scam going, to keep the Ponzi going, because that's what central banking is. It's a Ponzi. And the only way to keep it going is to have continuous crisis. And that's why they use the old strategy of divide and conquer, or, you know, divide and rule. They keep us at each other's necks. So that we don't fight against them. Can you imagine if there was as much passion and will to protest against central banking as there is for, let's say, Just Stop Oil or Free Palestine or, you know, Black Lives Matter or any other topics that we have? Can you imagine that if everyone was protesting in front of the Federal Reserve building in Washington, D.C., or the Federal Reserve building in New York, Manhattan, or the Bank of England, or at the ECB in Frankfurt? Can you imagine if there were protests every day? Yeah, people would wake up. The press would have to cover it, but unfortunately there isn't. And I'm not sure if I said this already, but money is a very important commodity. Yes, and it is a commodity. It has to have value. And it's the most marketable commodity. And I'm going to recommend some books to you at the end so that this will help you if you want to go further and look into the topic. So before money, of course, there was barter, or people lived off the land, you know, subsistence. And money made specialization and trading a lot more efficient. So it's very important. It also helped people save. What does saving mean? Well, it's when you create some kind of value through creating a product or providing a service, and you created so much value that you can keep some of that money and not have to spend it all. You can save your efforts. But if the money is bad, if it's fiat currency and they keep inflating it, like the central bankers do and governments do, that currency, because it's not even money, it's fiat currency, starts to lose value. And why is that? Well, it's the simple law of supply and demand. When you create something, let's say 10 times, and then you've got something that has been created only 2 times, that thing is going to become worth less against that other thing. And that's what inflation is all about. So, and that's how the central bankers and the globalists, the people above, that's how they suck the wealth from the general public. The wealthy people, of course, they protect themselves because they've got access to they've got first access to this spigot of fiat currency. They use it before you do. And that's why, you know, there's so much wealth inequality as well. And what would be the alternative to central banking, because a lot of people, you know, can't think of a world without a central bank. Well, you only have to go back to 1835 or 1836 in the United States to find the alternative. And that was when President Andrew Jackson, he paid off the national debt in 1835. Yes, it went to zero, the national debt. And then the next year, 1836, he did not renew the charter for the Second Bank of the United States. So it's possible. And there were no legal tender laws in the US as well. So Americans used all kinds of money. They used, US gold and silver coins, but they also used European coins. It didn't matter as long as it was gold and silver. And yeah, people might argue that they want to use cryptocurrencies today. And I don't have anything against that, or Bitcoin. And a lot of people ask, why don't you talk more about Bitcoin? Well, because I prefer still gold and silver. And even though Bitcoin, has done really well price-wise, and there's a limited supply of it, but I still have my doubts about the origins of Bitcoin, you know, where it came from. I'm not too comfortable with it. But anyway, back to central banking. Yeah, the solution, you know, what would we have instead of central banking? Well, we just have a free market in money. And in banking, if you want to leave your money with someone else, if you have a lot, if you've been fortunate enough to accumulate quite a bit of money, you might want to store it with someone. That's what a bank is supposed to be. But back to, let's say, the national debt. I would say that without the Federal Reserve or without the Bank of England, we wouldn't have the humongous amount of debt that we have now in the U.S. The national debt is 34 trillion. Here it's not as much, of course, but it's you know, it's gone up like more than 10 times in the last 20 years. We're up to almost 3 trillion. Yeah, we wouldn't have that without a central bank. And how do they keep this debt going? Well, through crises. They have to convince us that there's an important crisis, that we have to pay taxes. And yeah, taxes is another thing that keeps this fiat currency game going. Is it any wonder that the IRS in the US was kicked off in 1913, just as the Fed was being created? Is it any wonder that the income tax in the UK was supposed to be a temporary tax to pay the Napoleonic Wars a couple of hundred years ago here in the UK? So yeah, taxation is a big part of it, even though the central bank is supposed to help in that matter by just inflating, because inflation is theft. Inflation is taking something of value from someone through the barrel of a gun, because that's what fiat currency and legal tender laws are. I mean, this is, as I said, the most important topic that I think I can talk about, and I haven't covered it for a while, but I have here one of my mugs. It's an End of Fed mug. As you can see, it's quite old. It's wearing out. Maybe I'm going to buy another one in my Teespring store. And I've got mugs as well for other central banks about abolishing or ending them. If you want to have a look, you can in the Teespring store. So I'm going to recommend a few books here that I think will help you if you want to dive deeper into the topic of central banking. The first one is The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. He talks about how the bankers got together in secret to plan the Federal Reserve. The other thing I would say, a lot of people have warned about central banking, but you know, like Ron Paul, and we're going to come to his book in a minute, like Charles Lindbergh Sr., he warned, he was a congressman at the time that the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and he warned against it. He said it was going to be the biggest money trust and that it would destroy America, and he was right. He was the father of the aviator, Charles Lindbergh Jr., and he was actually originally from Sweden. So he knew about central banking, seeing that he came from Sweden. They had the first central bank. So what's the other book? The other book is What Has Government Done to Our Money? And I think it's imperative that you read that. You don't have to be an economist, a PhD economist, and you can be, I think, as young as 10 or 11, and you understand. By Murray Rothbard, he'll explain to you what money really is and why we don't need central banks. The other one, of course, is And the Fed by Ron Paul. I met Ron Paul in 2002 at the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. So I've been at this for many years. Why did I go to the Mises Institute? Well, they had their 20th anniversary conference. I really enjoyed that. But And the Fed. What about Milei from Argentina? You know, I was quite encouraged when he won, because he said he was the first thing he was gonna do is abolish the central bank, and he hasn't done it. So that's the other thing. You can't really trust any of these politicians, even if they say they're gonna abolish the central bank. There must be another way to do it. Maybe you have, you know, a way to abolish the central bank. I think it's all political. We need to inform the public, and that's why I do these videos. Can we do it through revolution? Yes, but you know, it's a revolution in thinking, not a violent revolution, because if you try something violent, they'll squash it. You know, that's the only, because they've got, you know, access to everything through the money printer. The other one is not really a book. It's a series of letters written by William Cobbett, who was an MP in the early 1800s. He was put in prison by George III for a couple of years because he wrote something George III didn't like. But he went over the Bank of England. It says Cobbett's paper against gold, containing the history and mystery of the Bank of England, the funds, the debt, the sinking fund, the bank stoppage, the lowering and raising of the value of paper money, and showing that taxation, pauperism, and poverty are all related to the Bank of England. The other one, some people might find it controversial, but I don't really. It's The Nameless War by Captain A.H.M. Ramsey. He was an MP who was put in prison by Winston Churchill for about 3 years during World War II. And he talks about central banking and how after the Bank of England was founded in 1694, that, you know, the powers that be, the bankers, made sure that a political theater was started, you know, the political parties. And why is that? Well, because it keeps people at each other's necks, and it doesn't you know, it keeps them from looking at this mechanism of central banking. And he gives a really good example. You know, the banker, they can take your pound and lend it 10 times. And a farmer, let's say with 4 acres of land, can earn 10 pounds a year. But yeah, that banker will earn interest on money he or she didn't create, while the farmer has to work hard and doesn't have the luxury of creating crops out of thin air. And what that does, according to Captain Ramsey, is that after centuries of this mechanism, you know, the people at the top, they suck all the wealth out of the producing class of the country. The other one is The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. This is probably a little harder to get. Yeah, so that's it. So I think, as I said, the best thing that we can do about central banking and the topic is to make people aware of it. And that's why Rudy and I are asking you to share this video as much as possible. Make sure you hit the like button, yeah, and make sure you comment as well. And make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Yeah, and talk to your friends about it, about the topic. And they say, how did you know that? Well, tell them about my channel. So with that, Rudy and I are going to wish you all a very good weekend. And we'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.